Hello, everyone. I'm Mohammad Tavakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to today's session of the Zoroastrian Studies Seminar Series featuring our distinguished colleague, Professor Yuhan Sohrab-Dinshaw Vevaina of the University of Oxford, who will be speaking on Hermeneutics of Zoroastrian commentary. I'm grateful to our colleagues, Professor Enrico Raffaelli and Professor Miguel Toledo, for co-convening the series. I would like to express my gratitude to our collaborators, the Federation of Zoroastrian Association of North America, Zoroastrian Society of Ontario, Encyclopedia Iranica Foundation, and the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute for enabling the establishment of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I would like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. My colleague, Professor Miguel Toledo will introduce Professor Vevaina, and then the session will be moderated by Professor Enrico Raffaelli. Professor Toledo.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to introduce Professor Vevaina. Professor Vevaina is the Bahari Associate Professor of Sasanian Studies and a Fellow at the Wolfson College at the University of Oxford. He completed his PhD in Iranian and Persian studies in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations at Harvard University in 2007. Since then, he has taught at the Harvard University, at the Stanford University, also at the University of Toronto, prior to coming to Oxford in 2017. He's the co-editor with Michael Stausberg of the Wiley Blackwell Companion to Zoroastrianism, the largest single-volume reference work on Zoroastrianism at 700 pages, published in paperback 2 years ago. His academic specialty is the study of hermeneutics, or theories of interpretation, with a focus on the interpretations of the Gathas in the Sasanian and early Islamic periods. In 2023, and this year, he published 2 books, the Sūdgar Nask of Dēnkard, Book 9, Text, Translation, and Critical Apparatus, and also Zoroastrian Hermeneutics in Late Antiquity, Commentary on the Sūdgar Nask of Dēnkard, Book 9, both published in Hagasovitz. He is currently preparing a co-authored critical edition, translation, and commentary of Manush-Tihr's epistles. It is a great pleasure to have you here, Yuhan. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So, thank you all very much for being here today. There are lots of people that I would like to thank, but I'll keep it very brief. I just would like to express my appreciation for my old colleagues at Toronto for having me back virtually as it is, and also for Miguel Angel for the very kind introduction. And so what I thought I would do today is what I would like to do is basically give you a brief discussion about how and what the project was that I've worked on for all these years. And in a sense, what I'm going to try and do is show you little pieces here and there of what made the work become as it was. What I'm not going to do is to get into very technical discussions about the contents, because I think that's actually much better read. And since we have a mixed audience, I think it makes more sense to kind of talk about some of the larger, broader, and sort of more general issues. Before I get going, I should say that projects like this don't really work without a variety of different people, and I'll make that point as I go through. But I do see that one of my editors is here. So Alberto Cantera, I would like to thank him, and Maria Matsuk, because without them, these books would have never seen the light of day. Maria especially waited many, 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 many years, and she had the patience of a saint. And I hope that, that the books sort of live up to all the time that it's taken. So with that, let me get going. Let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, good. So the basics of the talk is that I wanted to do a kind of a hermeneutic, so to speak, of producing this commentary, which itself is a hermeneutics written in Middle Persian of the Old Avestan corpus. So, the three sacred prayers, the five gathas, the Yasna Haptang Haiti, and the Aryama Ishya. So here we see, just to so you can see them, here we have the covers of the two books. And in a sense, one of the things that I think is really important to realize is that the books, they work hand in hand. So, before I sort of discuss the nitty-gritty of the books, let's just look at a very basic and more general question. What is the Dēnkard? And this is something that will be very familiar to the various specialists who are here. So it's the largest surviving of the Pahlavi literature that we have, about approximately 170,000 words, 9 books, of which the first 2 are lost with absolutely no information about them. We know from sort of the various sources that we have that are the second editor or redactor of the work, Adurbad, the son of Ahmed, lived in the late 9th, early 10th century, and he is mentioned as a contemporary of Zatspram, the brother of Manuschir, the high priest of Fars and Kerman, who was known to be alive and writing in 881 CE. And I should say that that Arash and I are currently working on an edition of Manuschir's epistles, is Namagiha. So our earliest colophon is dated to 1020 CE in Baghdad, so about, let's say, 10 years after Ferdowsi passes away, and about 20 years after the Shahnameh is completed. And the colophon is incredibly long and quite technically detailed, and it's quite a lot of challenges in it. And it's definitely one of the things that I think people will find interesting when they work their way through the books, if they do. And so let's just a very brief bit about the various books. So book 3 is largely philosophical and apologetic, and it contrasts the Dane, with other religions, and it has a variety of different materials that I think are being studied lately by people here as well. So we see, Ted Good is here and others. Book 4, of course, has been worked on for many years by Samra, and it has, amongst other things, the history of the transmission of the Avesta and the Zand, and a variety of different topics. Book 5 is the sort of responses that we have of Adur Fan Bai, son of Farrokhzad, the first editor, to 2 non-Zoroastrians, Yacobi Khalidan and Bokht Mare, regarding Zoroastrian beliefs, sort of apologetics, polemics, things like that. Book 6 is what we would basically call the sort of the Andars genre, with a sort of wisdom literature. In many ways, that makes it the most readable of the books. And I think and Shaked worked on that in the late 70s and published it. Book 7 is the sort of the life and legend of Zarathustra. Book 8 is a bit more complicated to explain, and I will discuss that as it is. So it basically discusses the 21 Nasks of the Dane, and it suggests, of course, that the 21 Nasks, so these tractates, and let's say, were to be understood as being correlated with the 21 words of the Ahuna Vairya prayer. So Yatha, Ahu, Vairyo, first three, and on we go. Atha, Ratu, Shashat, Chit, Cha. So, and it's sort of described as being a kind of an encapsulation of the entire tradition in a way, that is the date. And Book 9 basically provides us with 3 of what were originally 7 Gothic Nasks that made up the one of the, let's say, types of the 21 Nasks. So we have basically Gothic Nasks, Hada Mansrig Nasks, and also the legal Nasks. And in that sense, it's worth saying, it's very basic stuff that has been said 100 times, but the only one of the complete Nasks that we have in Avestan and Pahlavi, or even virtually complete, because there's a little missing in the Pahlavi, is the Videvdad. And I think the idea being, of course, that this represents the lost wisdom, knowledge, and sort of scholastic output, if you will, from the Pahlavi perspective, of a much larger world of Avestan literature that must have once existed. So, in a sense, Dēnkard 9 has these Pahlavi resumes of these 3 Nasks. So, my actual edition is just the first of the 3, the Sūdgar. Now, so let me say a little bit about the gestation of the actual project, sort of the hermeneutics of the project, if you will. So the work began about 20 years ago, and it was part of my doctoral dissertation, which was Studies in Zoroastrian Exegesis and Hermeneutics, with a critical edition of the Sūdgar Nask of Dēnkard, Book 9. And the dissertation at the time was sort of a hybrid topic, and it was a hybrid dissertation in the sense that the first half had an introduction, 3 interpretive essays, and a conclusion, and the second half was a text translation and critical apparatus of the Sūdgar Nasks, which I should add is about 6,600 words and about 31 pages in Modern's 1911 edition. So just to put it in perspective, that those 6,600 words generated about 240,000 words between the 2 volumes when they were published 20 years later. So you can do the math on how many words of commentary in our target language sort of represents the works that was actually the original material in the primary source. And the dissertation from 2007 became the first volume, the critical edition, which was published in 2023. And then the commentary was written was sort of a postdoctoral project, if you will. It was written all the years afterwards, and I did not work on a commentary during the dissertation, and that was published alongside the other one, but just in 2024. And I should add here that none of this would have been possible without the incredible support and encouragement and help from Dr. Shervo, my former supervisor. Shervo is one of the most generous people I've ever met, in the sense that he was always there to help me at every step of the way, and we worked through these texts, and as you really as someone now supervising people, you really come to appreciate how much the difference is between what it means when someone takes the time and rolls up their sleeves and actually does the work alongside you, rather than just sort of being, an absentee supervisor. So for that, I'm just immensely grateful. So let me just turn and say a little bit about the earlier scholarship on Dēnkard 9. I think it's quite important to always put all our sources in context. And years ago, when I came to Toronto in 2006 and I had a breakfast with Mohammed Tavakoli, he said something to me that I will never forget and I'll use all the time, which is, we must always historicize. And that's something that has stuck with me. And so just to give it a little bit of a context as to how our scholarship comes to be, and how we build it upon what comes before. So the first translator of the work of Dēnkard Book 9, all 3 of the Nasks, was Edward William West. And he tells us in the late 19th century, and he says, the 8th and 9th books also contain very few of those involve sentences with long parenthetical clauses, which, owing to the habitual absence or misplacement of stops, are very perplexing to a translator, just like his sentence. The chief difficulties of the text arise from its synoptical character and the consequent want of connection between its sentences, there being often too little context to define the meaning of a doubtful word. And then he goes on to say the purpose of the Sūdgar was apparently, as its name imports, to extract useful instruction from the text and to illustrate it with legends and remarks. So this is sort of how he, in a sense, talks about the style and contents of the work. Basically, a couple of decades later, Dhanjisha Merjibhai Madan, who was the editor and copyist of the famous B manuscript that I'll come to, he tells us something, and this is the edition. This is typically what people have used in all the years prior to having the Dresden edition and the facsimile. He tells us, the part which was assigned to me in the publication of this work was not that of an editor. My instructions were most scrupulously to publish a copy and an exact copy of the manuscript B. I have therefore not amended even patent mistakes in the manuscript wherever they occurred. That being said, I think it's worth keeping in mind that Madan being the printed edition that people used all the years and which we often still cite, Madan does take the B manuscript and separates out the words because the B manuscript is very jammed together. So in fact, even though he tells us that he copied all the mistakes and such and made no changes, there's a tremendous amount of hermeneutics that goes into Madan's edition. And even though people like Bartolome and others criticized him, I find him for the most part to be, generally speaking, completely fine in terms of in what he gives us. But having said that, it is not an actual manuscript. So, and these are all important points to establish how the text was established from a philological perspective. Then, of course, we have the father and son Sanjanas, who published the entire Dēnkard in 19 volumes, spread over from 1874 all the way to 1928. And they say that, the son says, the Sūdgar Nask, the first Nask, treated in Book 9, was devoted to elucidating important points from the Avesta text of the various Has, that's the Haitis, of the Gathas, with suggestive remarks and allusions to the history and legend prevailing in ancient Iran. And basically, I think that's, relatively speaking, one can't argue with that too much. We jump ahead a little bit to the 1960s, and Ahmed Tafazoli, one of the great scholars, the mid-century and later scholars, says, and he wrote his dissertation on the first two Nasks, that is on the Sūdgar and the Vasht Mansar Nask, the bag being too big. And he did his dissertation on this topic in 1966 in Persian. And he basically says about the Sūdgar that it can be divided into three parts, so to speak, in terms of its relationship with its Avestan, let's say, forlaga. He says, we have excerpts whose equivalents can be found in the Avestan texts, parts that have the characteristics of living Avestan, but we do not have equivalents to them, but similar ones can be found in the Avestan texts, and parts that we do not have Avestan or Zan texts or the like, but in terms of style, we can be sure that these parts are taken from Avestan texts and their origin is simply not available to us now. And I have to say, I completely agree with all of this as well. Tafazoli did also try to sort of do an etymological analysis of Sūdgar, and he suggested he connects it with the root su to meaning to save, and he tries to make it connected with savior, because we do see the connections in the material with Soshans and things like that. And he says, and when it comes to the actual content of the Nask, he says there are two types: religious rules and moral content related to good and bad deeds and enumerating their results, and then also religious fables and myths. Again, I think this sort of, very generic sense captures the contents. Jumping forward a little bit to the very late 90s, Don Shapira sort of contrasted the first of the two Nasks when he says the Zand of the Vasht Mansar is, to speak, a philological one, while the Sūdgar Nask is of a rather associative and midrashic character. Also something that I've argued for in that sense. And he said in a subsequent article, which I don't agree with at all, actually, As in other cases, it is the Vashtmansar version rather than that of the just quoted Sūdgar that preserves the older material, while that of the Sūdgar Nask underwent serious censorship. The reason for the censorship was that being originally of mythological character, the Sūdgar Nask was entitled to be more popular, thus opening the way to introducing newer and not unfrequently heterodoxical material. I don't agree with any of this. I think challenging this is sort of to some extent what a lot of my work has been about. And I think all the Nasks have different things to offer us in terms of their relationship with hermeneutical agency vis-a-vis the Pahlavi, but just as much in terms of many things that are clearly deep archaisms that go back to the Avestan material, but of course may or may not be actually attested in Avestan, as we have the corpus that has survived to us today. So, and then Raham Asha in 2009 translated the Sūdgar Nask, and he also tries to make connections with this thing, and he says that he sort of points out that the word Sūdgar, Sūdgari does show up in the Christian Psalter, and it sort of translates the Syriac terms Kushapa and Takshepta, that is something like prayer, supplication. And he, in a sense, suggests that, he says about the text, it's a separate chapter, begins with a Gothic phrase, illustrates it with ethical and theological remarks, with sometimes allusions to the legends. Again, much like what all the others have said. And again, I don't have any great, issue with that. But I think it's important to sort of understand what people have done before. And that is just something that I think is, it's a basic requirement for us as scholars, but it's also something for community members, and there are many here, that, none of us operate in a vacuum. We're always building on the work that people have done. Some we take, some we discard, some we engage with, some we critique. And I think that's understanding that in context is a fundamental aspect of understanding what it is that we do as scholars. So, the 21 Nasks of the day. So, what I've done here, I've just taken one of the slides from my first volume, and you can see here that, if you look in the left column, you can literally read out the Yathahu Vairio prayer word by word, and then I've kind of correlated it with the names of the Nasks as we have them in Dēnkard 8. And of course, I have to say Dēnkard 8 has two different lists with different orders, but I've just given you one. And then on the two other columns, what I did was I just put in the material that existed in Kellenz's 1987 article from Encyclopedia Ironica that sort of very loosely discusses some of the general topics. There are many other ways to do this. And, in Alberto Cantera's 2004 book, he has much more detail. I just use this one because it's just pithy enough to fit a slide and to fit on a page. And so it's a bit neat in that sense. And so in a sense, this list here has the Sūdgar as the second one, and with Stod Yasin first, and then we get Sūdgar, Vashtmansar, and Bag. And for all practical purposes, what I'm engaging with is the Sūdgar. So, if to look at one of the passages we have from Dēnkard 8, and it says, and the reason for the division into 21 parts of the three divisions of the enumeration of the tradition, which is what translates Dane Oshmorishan, like so for Persian speakers, connected with the root, the verb shomordan, to count, is within the selections which it is made from. It is manifest thus as well in the three gas, that is of the Ahunvar, that is the three verse lines, which is the basis or the foundation, bun, of the enumeration of the tradition, namely its 21 words. And since the three gas of the Ahunvar, which are the foundation of the enumeration of the tradition, are an example of the three divisions of the enumeration of the tradition, and thus it shows that these three divisions are the three parts of what are the 21 words, as it is evident that the omniscient creator himself fashioned one utterance from each single word. And here I would argue that the one utterance is basically each one of the Nasks. So each Nask is sort of understood to basically be the expanded version of what is sort of encoded in one single word of each word of the Ahuna Vairya. So 3 verse lines of 7 words each, making up 21 words. And this is all part of the classic symbolism of the foundational symbolism, numerological symbolism that we have in Zoroastrianism. 3 for good thoughts, words, and deeds, which we have found elsewhere. The text does say that. The 7 for the Amesha Pentas, and the 21 representing the Nasks, all together making up, in a sense, a sort of a summa of what is the Dēn. And, then it says the sections of the parts, such as the Hads and Fragads, which are within the Nasks, from the testimony and awareness of the tradition, from the teachings of Zardusht, to whose pre-soul, that is Frabahar, one sacrifices, it is known that there were 1,000, that is 1,000 chapters, which we see from another source, within the realm of the Iranians, Eran Shah. And after the chaos that came from the death of that one of bad fortune, produced by wrath, Cheshem, Alexander, thus there was not so much recovered as would be possible to consider authoritative. And in the past, people have translated Pad Dastwar Doshtan as meaning as could have been held, in the meaning or the mind of a single Dastwar, a single priest. And I think that is something, I think that's Bailey does it like that, and others as well. So this, again, this text itself is giving us an emic or indigenous narrative of the loss of much of the material that we see from the past. And then it goes on to talk about the various aspects of the material. And it says, and it is well known that the blessed Adurbad, son of Mahraspan, underwent the ordeal for it, and he came out unharmed. And until now, in the chronicles of the lands of the Iranians, it has been, or realm of the Iranians, it has been preserved in writing, in teachings, chashishan, and agreements, passion. And it says, and the writing of each separate Nask, that is, as to what it speaks about more particularly, namely about how each Nask is enumerated. Here we have a passive, Oshmuri Haid, and one comprehends that which is within the various Hads and Fragads. For within these, and I think this word it's a bit ambiguous, but looks like it could be Nishkanein. It's a rare word, something like indestructible perhaps. And fitting chronicles any pain, dard, and difficulty, drushtag, is explained, again in passive. But first the individual Nasks, so that it may be written about that which one says is the custom to write, the extent of what can be obtained, not wonders, but simply fitting, that is fitting in itself, Khwadi Pasazak. And so this is the kind of style that is quite challenging to translate, but this is much of what the way the text looks in Dēnkard 8 and Dēnkard 9, in that sense, is a very, very similar style. Now, this passage is really, really quite interesting because in 1630, in India, in Gujarat, Henry Lord, the chaplain of the East India Company, gives us an early modern passage, a text, a little description of 3 of these tracts, and he says. They affirm, and you can, if you look and read it, you can see the early modern spelling and the kind of slightly chaotic spelling in English. They affirm then that this book contained in it 3 several tracts, the first whereof treated of that which we call judicial astrology, foretelling the events of things to come by judgment of the stars, which by them is called Sūdgar. The second did treat concerning physic, or the natural knowledge of things with their causes and the cures of the diseases to man. The third was called Zardusht, because Zardusht was the bringer thereof, and this contained their law and matters that concern religion, which books according as their matter was diverse, so they were delivered to men of several studies and learning, and on it goes. And it's really important because I think it's worth saying that the understanding of these 3 Nasks and these 3 categories of Nasks that make up the 21, we don't hear much about it as we go later on. We do have some material in Persian versions of this, but for the most part, what we have in the Dēnkard is really the kind of the main body of material. So the fact that he knows about this material in India in the first part of the 17th century, I think is actually quite important. Besides, of course, seeing the lovely early modern spellings and such. So Let me say a little bit about the relationship between Dēnkard Book 9 and the Old Avesta. So, here again, I've just pulled a slide from one of my appendices, and it should be said that in the Dēnkard, each one of the sort of what we might call chapters, if you will, are called fraggards, which is the term that is used for divisions of Avestan material, but from the Videvdad, they don't call them heities as you have in the Yasna. And I think, it's quite an involved thing to explain, but I think I should say that Alberto Cantera has a very, very convincing explanation for this in terms of the broader aspect connected with intercalation and the use of these various Nasks in the actual sort of Avestan period. And but again, here we can just see that to put it simply, we see here Fraggard 1 through 12, Fraggard 13 through 22, 23, depending on which one. And so it's worth saying that every one of the three Nasks that is extant has one Fraggard. Let's say it starts with the Yathaho Vairyo, and you'll get one commentary in the Sūdgar, and then it goes to the Hashem Vohu, Yengi Hatam, and downwards. When it finishes, it goes to the Vashtmansar, and then it'll have the same one for the Yathao Veryo, Hashem Vohu, Yengi Hatam. The Vashtmans has an early chapter that exists before that the others don't have, so it looks a little bit off-centered. And then the bag does the same. So you can, and this is the great potential for the text, you can see three different commentaries made by Zoroastrians in a single work with completely radically different meanings for their understanding of the Avestan, Old Avestan, Gothic, let's say, Yasna Haptang Haitik source material. And this, for me, was where I really understood when I was a graduate student that what we are dealing with is something that we've been fighting over and arguing over for years and years, trying to establish a fixed and stable meaning philologically for the origin of the Gathas. And then we say the tradition says X and the tradition says Y, and we treat it in a kind of homogeneous way. But in fact, the tradition itself recognizes a plurality of different interpretive voices. And in fact, they have very different approaches to it. And I think that, to me, really felt, at the time as I did it, I was like, this is so postmodern in a sense. And it really stuck with me because what it does is it allows us to see the much richer understanding of the development of the tradition from multiple different perspectives. That is, we don't have to get into this question of, is there a single orthodoxy? The short answer is no. They have just multiple different approaches, even though they may all be fighting individually for a kind of claim to orthodoxy. So let's look I want to do just a very brief bit about the manuscripts and such, because we do have philologists here, and it is important to say. So this stemma of the manuscripts, sort of beginning in the early 9th century, and then the loss of the copies of books 1 and 2, and then Mahwindad's colophon from 1020, which is 369 post Yazdagir, and then we've got other copyists go all the way down until we get to the famous B manuscript from 1660 in Turkabad. And we also get the manuscript, the DH manuscript from Kerman in 1577. So in a nutshell, for all the fanciness of all this material, what we really have are two really fundamental and important manuscripts. DH, the older, and the bigger full B manuscript of the entire Dēnkard. DH does not have the entire Dēnkard, but it does have the three Nasks. And they go back to an origin, a common original, but there are some very significant differences. And that's what all the work was done in the critical edition to establish that point. Now, I have to say that when West made his translation of the sacred books of the East, he did not have DH. He only used K43b, which is the copy, which is in Copenhagen. And K43b has mistakes that DH does not. So in that sense, my work, I think, is a little bit more refined in terms of the actual physical readings, let alone translation and all that comes with that, building on what they've done. And then I should also add that Tafazoli, Shapira, they all used K43 and they used the modern edition as a stand-in for the B manuscript. So they did none of them used DH in that sense. In fact, the modern edition has a tiny bit of DH where there's a little bit of the B manuscript, which was lost when folios were lost. So in fact, when it says that it's B, it's not exactly B, it's B with a little bit of DH, maybe like 3% of the text or something like that. So that's also, I think, one major advantage that comes in my edition is that it's much more in a much more secure grounding. And when the philologists look at it, you'll be able to see very clearly that, DH is very much the manuscript that when I had to decide between DH and B, I tended most of the time to lean towards DH. And I think that's a difference than what people have done in the past. And then also all the secondary manuscripts and tertiary manuscripts, J5 by Ervad Kukadaru and some of the Merji-Rana copies that were made. There are multiple Merji-Rana copies which were made both for the Kama and the Merji-Rana library. Now they're in two places. So I looked at all of those as well, and sometimes they were helpful to reconstruct things. So let me I'm running a bit short on time, I would guess, so I don't want to dwell too much on this. But I just give you here sort of just a very brief. I've just put on the slide the opening of the colophon of B, and I've also put the opening of the colophon of DH, which was copied in Kerman. And we also have, he also says things like, I wrote it for my own kin and for my own children to last 150 years. In fact, it's lasted much more than that. And he says, and then he said, he quotes this famous line from Avestan, this Aiwo Panto yo Ashahe Vispe Anyasham Apathnam is the way the form is given in the text, which is very similar to, it's just a very little variant on what we have at the end of the Yasna in Yasna 72.11. So there's one path of righteousness, all those are righteousness, so to speak. Is what the way that the Pahlavi continues on it. And then the manuscripts of the Sūdgar Nask. So again, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but I've given the concordances and all of that. And as I said here, I just already sort of discussed this, in terms of who had access to what and such. So I should also add that I didn't mention Marian Mollet, but Mollet's work was also very useful for this, and he does translate some passages as well. But much the same, Mollet did not use the DH manuscript, and Mollet's readings are not always very reliable. The challenge of studying Zand in general, I think, is something as a genre is worth saying. So I wanted to quote Lawrence Mills, who was the first scholar of Avestan in the English-speaking world who had a professorship of some kind. He was the extraordinary professor of Zend at Oxford. And Mills is really one of those figures who's sort of fallen away, and we don't look at his work as being very useful compared to, say, Bartolome or Geldner or West and such. But I think he has a really important quote here, and I think this is something worth thinking about. And he says, but in the Gatha commentaries, context often gives us no aid at all. Accuracy may be wholly wanting in one place where the most valuable results await us in the next word. As a consequence, many of us, unconsciously, club together to keep up our appearances while we ignored or unintentionally misrepresented the whole subject. And one of the least critical remarks that we have ever made was that the translations of the Gathas depend upon a crude application of etymology without any report of the actual sense. And so he says, so the translations are often richest for research where they are the worst as mere renderings, that is, mere renderings of the Avestan original. What we need the most is not even their vast body of correct root etymology, so dear to a beginner, the thing for a true constructor, that is a constructor of the tradition and reconstructing it, is the seeming heap rubbish out of which glints here and there the gold of discoveries. And I found this passage many years after I was working on it, but I really think it kind of captures in many ways what I've tried to argue for in terms of my approach to the material. So I'll just say a very brief thing about orality connected with Dēnkard 9, because you just cannot escape orality when you're looking at the study of the ancient Iranian world. So, Dēnkard 9 has a lot of the characteristic features that we might expect of oral modes of transmission. That is a freer word order, suggesting an underlying Avestan forlaga, ring compositions, symbolic numbers, recurrent phrases, formulaic language, paratactic and enumerative style, a great number of nominal sentences and verbal nouns in ishin or ishni instead of finite verbs, the raising of verbs or lowering of other elements, sort of violating subject-object-verb syntax, which we would normally expect from sort of, garden variety Pahlavi. And when you read this, it's very, very clear. You just feel that this really is a Pahlavi version of something that was likely a lost Avestan. And I really struggled with this for a long time. I was quite skeptical of this when Chervo first sort of argued for it when we discussed it in the early years. And I really have come to believe that, and I do make the point in the book. And I think, once again, I would say that, many people who've worked on Avestan have made similar points. And in this sense, I think, Alberto Cantera is also in one of his articles sort of reconstructs a little piece of what could look like. And I feel that kind of approach definitely is something that I feel cannot be sort of escaped from under. And that being said, I think it's really important to say that in a disciplinary sense, those of us who work on Pahlavi connected with this lost Avestan material and the reception of the Avestan material, we just cannot do away with Avestan. I think it's the field has sort of hit a moment where Avestan was in its heyday for many years into the late 20th century, and now Pahlavi has become, there are more people working on Pahlavi, but I really don't think that these things should be two separate disciplines in that sense. They really have to be read in a single unified way, each basically informing the other, and it's perfectly okay if they don't, in a sense, agree with each other. That is part of what makes for the dynamism of hermeneutical endeavors vis-a-vis a living, moving, breathing tradition. So let me just say a very brief bit about commentary as a rhetorical form. And here it's not my own words. I wanted to quote Aaron Hughes because he has a very nice quote here. Commentary is an attempt at retrieval. It is a form of activity that seeks to retrieve a past and in so doing unlock the contemporary landscape. By situating itself interstitially between past and present, familiarity and unfamiliarity, it attempts to belong to both worlds. In so doing, it retrieves, often selectively, those elements of the past that will be most useful to the contemporary discussion. Commentaries revalorize a discourse that took place in the past in order to emphasize the social, moral, and authentic continuity between then and now. And that's exactly the point that I've said so many times to Zoroastrian audiences. What are Zoroastrians looking for when they come to us scholars? What Zoroastrians want and what all living people want when they're engaging with their own individual traditions, whether it's national or religious or cultural or in whatever form of heritage, people want usable pasts. They want pasts that make sense for themselves. And that is much of what I would argue I've tried to show in the commentary of the Dēnkard. That is, the Sūdgar Nask attempts to make the Avestan archaic past late antique or early Islamic, depending on your perspective. So this is how I understand what is happening in the Sūdgar Nask. So I would say it employs a particularly striking hermeneutic mode to interpret Gothic passages. Many of its interpretations appear to be specific interpretations of the titles or incipits, that is the beginnings, of the traditional divisions of the Old Avesta. So Vahishto Ishti, the best seeking, which are then dilated upon using highly allusive intertextual narratives that in some cases appear to never return to the Old Avestan base text. So the text of, for example, the Vahishto Ishti, if they understand the title as meaning the best seeking, which is more or less how most of us understand it, and then their commentary is about the bad seeking, the worst seeking, so to speak, of Ajidahaka. And they read all this mytho-epic material into the Gathas. And so if you read the text and you read the original, you're like, why are these figures there? They're not in the original. And so this is why people historically have just said, oh, the Sūdgar is just a mishmash of texts. They didn't know what they were doing. They just put it together in some kind of, ridiculous approach. And I don't believe this at all. I've sort of argued that what we actually have is this associative style where mytho-epic contents, these expansive narratives, and the harmonizing of seemingly unrelated Avestan and Pahlavi sources all make up a new commentary that, in a sense, re-encodes the Gathas. It allows them to make the claim that every part of the tradition can be found in the Gathas. And therefore, every single fragad, I've made the argument, has a narratological kind of connection. The best way I like to explain this is it's like if you listen to free associative rap. If you listen to, for example, Houston rap, they have a set of themes that are being discussed. And then, of course, it can be changed to fit whatever particular context they want to argue for with that particular audience in that particular moment. And so in a sense, I think that is much of how the material originally was designed. And then, of course, the only way to make sense of the material is to find the allusions in other texts. Therefore, I make the argument about them being intertextual. So this is exactly how the commentary, in the actual book lands up being, I don't know, whatever, almost 500 pages in very small font, because for just 6,600 words. Because in a sense, this text has every other text built into it. You get the Yasna, you get the Videvdat, you get the Nirangistan, you get the Yashts, you get every Pahlavi text you can imagine, virtually every single other text that you can find and you can think of, you will find it in there. And I've tried as much as I can to get all the intertextual parallels, though I'm 100% sure there are many others that I missed, didn't translate, or chose ones that are probably not as perfect as the other ones. So there are some themes and motifs that I've sort of discussed, and I won't dwell on this too long, but I will just say, so that, the basic approach that I've argued for is that there's a hermeneutic trigger for each fragad. It's often the interpretation of the incipit or the beginning. And then you get an enumeration of the contents of that fragad using abar, about this, blah, 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 blah. And then ud enis ku, and this too. And then they'll say it's about X, and this too, and they'll switch topics. And then you'll get the transitions. And you often get, as I said, these negative counter examples, where you get 5 positive virtues followed by 5 negative virtues. And then you will say, oh, Ajidahak had all these 5 faults. We have a lot of material connected with Andar's literature. We've got eschatological material. We've got the importance of adhering to the law. We've got the standard Zoroastrian sort of, let's say, cardinal virtues of charity, radi, often in the context of the charity vis-a-vis the priesthood. And we have references to the importance of the priesthood. We've also got these didactic claims connected to the inescapability of death and the need to live well. And this is something that Götz Koenig recently and I were having some email exchanges. It's what I don't use the term in the book, but I think the term is a very good one. He calls it the genre of vanitas, that is not to have vanity about this particular world, that you must live for the next. And this is a really important genre that we find all over late antique and early medieval literature. And it's all buried away as parts of commentaries of the Gathas, which evidently do not show these things. the need to live well, the Zoroastrian way, the importance of reciting the Gathas. And it says, for example, how the one who in a Mazdian village after 15 years of age had not recited the Gathas was in sinfulness, like a dog being thrown a piece of meat. And then we've got, various other things connected with sexual propriety and in terms of, various aspects about marital sex and extramarital sex. And then, of course, the standard passages connected with the body and one's soul and things like that. Really, you name it, you more or less have it. The only major topic that we don't have in the text, from my perspective at least, is the topic of Huedo next of kin marriage. And what's strange about that is that in the Persian commentaries and discussions, the brief synopses of the text, they say that Huedo is in there, but we don't find it. So there's something very interesting going on here, which probably needs some more interrogation. So I don't want to dwell, but I'll just finish off with just show you one little example. It's probably a little bit hard to read. It's a bit on the small side. I should have blown it up a little bit. But just to show you. So it says, the 10th fragad, the Yashiautna, is about the complaint of the spirit of the fires to Ormazd about people. 7 topics. So, Hafdar. The first one is the complaint about householders for considering him, that is the fire, abject and pointless, lighting him immoderately, working with him with unwashed hands, and, for example, the girl who demeaned the fire underfoot and broke his embers and brought violence into his glow. The second complaint is about who carries the fire from a dwelling where protecting the fire is according to the law to a dwelling where it is not according to the law. And then we get other ones. We have one wonderful example here, which really is not found anywhere else in Avestan and Pahlavi literature as far as I could find. And there he lay like a youth in a stupor, itchy, feverish, and cold. That is he, the fire. From the demons coming upon him and infecting him, and for healing him of that illness, bring forth to him pure sandalwood or frankincense or aloe wood or pomegranate, or whatever was the most sweet smelling of plants. And so we have all these various complaints. The complaint about the promiscuous woman who, when menstruation comes upon her, lets the dirt and filth from her menstruation reach him, and about the sickness and stupor resulting from her is written above. And we have all these various passages. And the text goes on to discuss these things. And so how do you deal with something like this, which is not in any obvious way found in the Gathas? So now I'm showing you what I did in the commentary. So this is a commentary on the Yashiaut Nahaiti, and I'll just show you a translation following Shervo and also looking at Humbach, which basically says in the original Avestan, this action, the speech and the sacrifice through which you now receive immortality, as well as order for yourself, O Mazda, and the command of wholeness, the foremost share of these is being given to you, O Ahura, by us gathered here in great numbers. So the beginning doesn't in any meaningful way tell us something sort of obvious about the connection. But in Yasna 34.4, that is 3 strophes later, it says, thus we here wish your fire to be powerful, O Ahura, by your order. Forceful and of brilliant help for him who supports. But for the one hostile to you, O Mazda, we wish his sins to be clearly seen through the bad things set in motion by his hands. And this is what they've basically done. You see that what the source does is the enumeration of 7 categories, in fact, more than 7, of transgressions against the fire in the text is read out of the gloss in the Pahlavi Yasna, which says, the tormentor, the one who torments the fire, Ani Beshidar, and the gloss Ke Ataksh Beshed. Here we see direct proof that the hermeneutical narrative of a fragad is specifically generated out or overlapped with the glosses to the Pahlavi version of the Yasna, and not strictly the Pahlavi translation of the Avestan Forlaga. And this is actually unusual. Most of the time, what you land up seeing is that they find something in the original material which then allows them to trigger off this highly, highly intertextual narrative. Now, that being said, here, it is connected with the harming of the fire in the actual Pahlavi. So just I'll read you the Pahlavi and then I will call it into this. So the Pahlavi Yasna, the Zan says, "Thus, O Ormaz, this fire of yours, which is strong, whose satisfaction comes through him who has righteousness, that is, his satisfaction comes at the time when the guardian of the oath is the one who has done work and good deeds, which is sharp and powerful for that fire. And for the one who stands by to help, he makes happiness manifest. Thus, O Ormazd, the tormentor," and this is the key point, the negative exemplar of the positive helper of the fire, "the one who torments the fire, then he, the fire, takes revenge by seeking the one who is powerful." Perhaps this is Ormazd, perhaps we don't know. But the point is, it's precisely this tormentor is what allows them to say, oh, okay, there's a tormentor, and who is this tormentor, and what is it alluding to? And the allusion is to this enumeration of all the various people who harmed the fire. And when I mentioned, for example, the young woman who stamps on the fire underfoot and menstruates, I have made the argument that this is likely to be connected with an actual historical event, because in Syriac, in the Vita of George and Mary, who apostatize from Zoroastrianism and become Christians, they are brother and sister and husband and wife, of course, before they then, no longer husband and wife. Mary, to show that she's a good Christian, she menstruates and steps on the fire. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that it is exactly that particular Mary. I personally think it very likely is. It is part of this type of genre where you have social reality that was problematic and challenging for the maintenance of the tradition. And so what they do is they read the challenge, their contemporary social challenges into the material. They do it in this enumerative style, hence the Oshmorishni. And in so doing, they encode back into the Avestan original the idea that all aspects of human history are, by definition, already predicted in the Gathas. That is, everything is always there. And so with that, let me sort of stop, and I'll be happy to take any questions people have. And yeah.
Yes. Thanks a lot for this extremely interesting and detailed presentation of your really important book, and important books, actually, plural. And so for starters, I would like to know if there's any question. There are a few questions in the chat box, but first I want to see if anyone is...
I see.
So, yeah. So maybe I can start. There were actually, I'll start from, okay. I had just said that. Okay, Sam Billy Moria, yes, you can ask the question. No, you're muted, so. No, yeah, I'm muted. Yeah.
Please unmute.
Yeah, please unmute, so we couldn't hear the question. Okay, now you're.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So, Yuhan, thank you for a very scholastic exposition. I enjoyed it. My question is that do you have a timeline on which the Dēnkard was initially written? And then, as it evolved into 9 books, what would be the first book kind of date and what would be the end? I believe that there would be a stretch of time, probably decades or something like that. I just want to know from you.
Yeah, the questions are excellent. The answers will not be excellent. The short answer is we know nothing about books 1 and 2. So in that sense, it's very difficult to work out the beginning and end, because if it was said, it would likely, some of this might have been said in the beginning. I mean, people tend to say things in beginnings. Dēnkard 9 just ends. It does not like they have some great exposition of what has happened in the earlier books. The best place to read about this, I would say, would be the article that Kianush Rezania has written, sort of summarizing it. I'm not saying that I agree with every bit of what he says, but I think he does discuss the Dēnkard as a holistic sort of entity. As far as the writing down goes, the colophons do tell us quite a bit. We can see that there are 2 redactors and such. One thing, and sort of Manushcher, who we can date, is sort of smack in the middle of both of them. That's what we can clearly see. But writing is a deceptive thing, because the writing down of the Dēnkard is not the contents of the Dēnkard. So the contents of the Dēnkard, some things go back extremely early. Some things are no doubt have been refashioned. We've got many, many, many references over the various books to Islam. So obviously those things are not Sasanian in that sense, or at least not until very late Sasanian. So, we're constantly trying to figure out what is Sasanian, what is post-Sasanian. And I think that has to be done on an individual basis. The Sūdgar Nask has a few things that are suggestive. It can be read both ways. And I think here's an important point that I always like to make, and I have to say this very clearly. If you take, for example, the famous apocalyptic book of Daniel in the Bible, in early colonial America, Americans interpreted this vis-a-vis the British. Sacred literature will always be re-enlivened. So if you have a text that says so-and-so bad guy without giving a name, let's say Ahlamog, heretic, or something like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it always had to be whoever it was said about first. It can be re-enlivened, which means one source can read it connected with a Sasanian era, and another part of the tradition could really understood it as being referencing Islam. You could have someone saying Agdain could mean, let's say Manichaeans for the sake of argument. The other one could be understanding it to mean Islam. And I think we need to be okay with that, because that's how sacred literature in its interpretive sense works. So I'm more interested in reader response. That is how readers understood texts, rather than trying to work out authorial intent. What did the authors mean? Having said that, I do forms of crypto authorial intent in every line of the commentary to motivate it, because I have to try and get into the minds of what they were trying to achieve. So when Alberto was here in Oxford, we had long discussions about this, and then we discussed this many times, This is always the kind of the artfulness of trying to reconstruct what we're looking at. Other questions?
Yes, so I'll take Professor Samra Zarnush's question.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank to you, Yuhan, for this wonderful presentation. And I wanted to, we had, today actually, we had a discussion about the lamentation of fire. And now I have another question for you. Yeah.
I put it in.
Wonderful. I actually had 2 questions. I start with the first one about what you call the hermeneutic trigger. Yeah. I wanted to ask if you have noticed any patterns in this the way these triggers appear in your text. I mean, do you see any rule, any pattern that would? Yes. Okay. And the second question about this lamentation of fire: do you think that a commentator has invented this story especially for this commentary? Or it has been inspired by something else, by a pre-existing narration or a book or something regarding the jurisdictional motives that we have in it, because as you mentioned the lamentation, the garzish, so it has a legal setup in which Ahura Mazda, the fire, and other characters appear, like in a court of law. Yeah. So it's, you know what I mean. So yes. Do you imagine this story included in the Sūdgar Nask as an invention of one single commentator, or is it taken from something else?
Okay, so the first question is slightly easier up to a point. So there are some tendencies I noticed. The fraggarts that have mythological material tend to, as Demenash noticed in the 50s, tend to be pushed at the back end of, I mean, they all noticed it, but it's at the back end of the Gathas. Those ones look more quasi-etymological. Like they're really trying to understand Vohushatra as good rule and Vahishtoishti as best seeking, things like that. Some of the others don't do that. Typically, I would say, I never did that. I mean, maybe I did the math on it, but I don't remember what it is exactly. I would say that 75, 80% of them tend to be interpreting the first strophe or something in the first strophe relatively early. A few of them, like the one I showed you, went to the fourth strophe. And then the one on the 4 ages, the Tava Urva Tahaiti, which I've published before, that one, I think Boyce is the one who noticed it. That one interprets something much, much later, like, well, I don't know, 13, 14 strophes in. So again, and that's just for the Sūdgar. I haven't gone and done this as extensively for the others. And I don't think the others operate in precisely the same way because they have a different style. So I would say, yes, there is something real there, and there are things, and that is, I think, one of the things that the colleagues will read the book and whether they find it convincing or they want to sort of ditch it or nuance it. The second question is more difficult because it sort of gets to a much larger question of what is original, I think. And for me, when I first started in this project, I really saw the Sūdgar as representing hermeneutical dynamism vis-a-vis the earlier past. And the more I worked, the less I saw that. So Chervaux initially saw the work as being all old material. I saw the work as being new readings of old material, so to speak. And I think, in a sense, we kind of we sort of met in the middle a little bit. And for me, I find that a lot of the material is clearly old. It's just how it's structured and what it is designed to do rhetorically and from a theological perspective that is, let's say, new. So the themes may be old, the content is likely old, but the format and the formulation of it may be new. And let me put it like this, what they think connects to what else, that is probably the work of a variety of different people, because I find it hard to believe that one person did this. It's just, it looks too archaic for it to be exclusively done in the late antique period. So this is clearly inherited material. But again, we have this tendency of wanting to get we want to argue for hermeneutical agency. We want to argue for traditional transmissional consistency. People want, we have a tendency of wanting to read top down or bottom up. And I think these are our...
Yes. No, I got it. But I asked the question about this specific passage because it is quite unique. We have a narration. We have a general setup. We have the personality of the fire, which is very important in this narration. So this is something very special in the Sūdgar.
Okay, I understand. This is very special actually within the Nask for another reason as well. The same narration of the fire who complains and talks to his father Ahura Mazda and all this stuff is also repeated in the Haiti for the Yasna Hapdang Haiti. And that's what I wrote up, for example. I wrote much of that up for Almut's Festschrift. And I think it's worth saying that the fact that it's in 2 places in the same text suggests to me, I don't actually say it in the book, but I think it suggests to me that this is some old material. Also, when we see the mythological material, it's often quite, when it's got some narration behind it, as we have in the Vaishto-Ishti and the Vohushatra, it is quite detailed. And in the Vohushatra, you really feel like you are reading a kind of Pahlavi version of a Shahnameh style narrative connected with the demons of Mazandaran and all of that stuff, with Fredon and all of that, that does not exist anywhere in any other obvious place. But the forms are old looking and things like that. And this is just, I think, what shows us that there was so much more material that from my perspective, I think this style of this material feels to me like that. But, you know, that I think I will leave for others to determine whether they have the same sort of the reaction to it. Much of this, to be fair, has to be done slightly intuitively, because not all these passages can be historicized. Though I have to say, I managed to find intertextual passages, parallels, one form or the other, for almost everything. The very few places where I wasn't. So, other people?
Yes, actually, yes. We have time for another couple of questions. I'll take one from the chat box and then Professor Cantera. So the first one is by Pedram Saibi, who says, could we suppose that the doctrine of each Nask mentioned in Dēnkard 9 is based on a distinct hermeneutic approach, I mean not content, to a specific Avestan text, such as Yasna 1921, as a pattern for by Nask?
Yes, I think so. I would say that the Sūdgar has a very particular style. The Vashtmans has a very particular style. The Bag has a particular style. All the earlier scholars who worked on it made the same argument. I think the Vashtmans tends to be more literal. It tends to be what we would call, let's say, more philological, as Shapira does say. I think it's all a matter of what your interests are. So, for example, the Bag is the biggest, and it is the one that's probably most explicitly philosophical, sort of what Demenash calls anagogical philosophy. And so it will require a whole different approach than, for example, what the Sūdgar takes. Some things will, of course, be the same. The basic principle of trying to do it intertextually and doing all that stuff, I think will stay the same. But they are different. And I think that also speaks to something quite interesting. When we have 7 Gothic Nasks, because they have such things, was this the opportunity to create different, sort of specifically different approaches, hermeneutical approaches, or were these different hermeneutical approaches something that was always floating in the air from Avestan times and then just get sort of distilled down? I have to say, I've become more traditional in my old age, and I find that I'm increasingly of the opinion that a lot of these answers are actually to be excavated in Avestan. So normally we've used Pahlavi to excavate Avestan, but I think in this particular case, there's a lot of Avestan excavation that will shed light on Pahlavi, that will then shed light back on Avestan. And that's ultimately what we want, is we want these corpora to be operating, in a sense, we want them to be operating in concert together without necessarily basically falling into the classic trap of reading one for the other. But which of course is the artfulness of doing, I would say, good philology.
Thanks a lot. I sincerely apologize with all the people who want to ask questions, but we only have time for the question from Professor Cantera.
Okay, so thank you for offering me the opportunity to take the one living question. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask a very simple question, and it's maybe to know, Yuhan, how you say about this. Also, you said that the gathas can be read in different ways and so on, that there are different hermeneutics of the gathas, and to realize this, it was like an impulse for your work, and you were very happy with this idea. But how about going a step further and saying that the gathas are well, I wouldn't say the gathas, but the collection of the 5 gathas with the Jasna Haptanhaiti, also the whole thing, the Stauta Yesnia, are a product of the hermeneutics. So it's not only that there are different hermeneutics of the gathas, but the whole thing is the result of hermeneutics.
I don't say it, but I've always believed that. I fundamentally think that, you know, what we have is a hermeneutic project in its macro sense. The problem, of course, is that because it is a hermeneutical project in a trans-historical way through time, we probably have multiple, let's say, smaller hermeneutical projects operating, and many of them are probably also probably somewhat contradictory. And so I think we land up with this great dilemma, which I think is, for me, very interesting. I recently, just yesterday, saw a passage where they were trying to understand one of these texts, and they say, so-and-so commentator says it means this, so-and-so commentator says it means that. Now, this is something we all see when we look at Nirangistan and other things like that. But I think that in a real sense, this entire 21 Nask project is it cannot be, I don't believe, when I first started out, I really saw this as a late antique sort of invention, so to speak. I'm not of that opinion. I'm of the opinion that this stuff is definitely much, much older. It took me time to feel that. And I think it raises the basic question that, and just to answer what you were saying, to try to get to it a little bit more like on the point, I think Avestan philology, especially Gothic philology and things connected with you know, has always operated with source criticism, trying to treat these as sources, rather than understanding these things as a hermeneutic project. And I think, for example, the work that you've done with the intercalation material vis-a-vis the Nasks, I find extremely, extremely convincing, because the passages that work, and I considered showing that passage. I didn't do it just because I thought I'd do something different. But, you know, in one of the fraggards, we've got a critique of Aji Dahaka and all these mythological figures, Aji Sruwar, things like that. And then we've got a condemnation of homosexuality. They don't make sense together. But as you showed in one of your articles, when you realize that you get a Videvdat intercalation into the Yasna, all of a sudden, the Videvdat passage that goes where the Yasna passage goes has the homosexuality. And then they take the word Sruwara, which they reinterpret as dragon rather than as from something like ritual peg or something like that. And that's how they create the interpretation. There's no way they could have done that interpretation if what your system was arguing for wasn't the case. So for me, I would say that this all sort of fits. It's just we don't have all the pieces, right? I mean,
yeah, I just wanted you to go a step further. And my question is, I can reformulate my question in another way. So there are two possibilities for the Stauta Yesnia. So for the order of the Gathas and the Yasna Haptan Haiti, and one, it is original, also conceived by a author or a mind, or it is a construction, a creation. And well, for the second possibility speaks, for example, the possibility of rearrangements that we know that there are. So the possibility of having two Yasna Haptan Haiti, and even of changing the possibility of changing the Ustavaiti Gata and the Spentamanyu Gata, changing the order and so on. If there is not a original pre-established order of the Stauta Yesnia, the Stauta Yesnia could be the result of a hermeneutics of a series of Old Avestan texts. So it is not casual that the Aryaman Isya is at the end and the Ahunavayus at the beginning. It is not casual that the Abahistoisti Gata is the last Gata, and so on. So this is my question. Do you think that the Gatas, also the Stauta Yesnia, are the result already of this total hermeneutic project that you are presenting?
I think so. I do think so, and I also think, you know, one of the early points when I first started working that I noticed that surprised me was the fact that the scholars of especially Gothic scholars had spent so much time arguing about what the correct order of the Gathas were, what is real Old Avestan, what is Young Avestan, and things like that. And if you look at what Dēnkard 9, what all three Nasks tell us is the corpus that they are interpreting. Yataho Vairyo, Hashem Vahu, Yengye Hatam. Then they go to Yani Mano, which they treat as the first Yask, as the first one, so to speak. You get your Gathas, you get your Yasna Haptang Haiti as a single unit. They don't treat it as 7, they treat it as one single concept. Your final Gathas and Aryama Ishyo. And surprise, surprise, weirdly enough, that's exactly the order that, let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say Humbak 1991 gives and we more or less now treat as Old Avestan. And yet no one ever bothered to say that, even though they read Dēnkard 9, that's the order. It's just the strangest thing that scholarship just ignored that as a principle, precisely because somehow it's some happy coincidence, but you would think that someone would have said it.
No, it's not a happy coincidence. It's just the result
that
both of them. No, it's the result that this is also the order of the exegetical manuscripts of the Yasna.
Yes, exactly.
So also Sūdgar builds up on the same structure that it is represented in the exegetical Yasna.
And that's a very important point, I think, especially for people who don't read the manuscripts and look at the material in the original, is that we've got liturgical manuscripts and exegetical manuscripts. And the question is, where did this material fit? And what's interesting is that in principle, in some aspect, it looks largely exegetical, but then it is the way that the material is actually constructed implies that you have all these broader intercalation systems and things like that at play. And I think this is something that is one of the, I'm not saying this because Alberto is here, but it is really the truth of it, is that I really, really struggled to make sense of whether or not what I was constructing and finding made actual sense, or whether it was just a hodgepodge of text that I was discovering by searching. And, the work that Alberto did in the years after the dissertation really was, in a sense, the Avestan proof of what I was finding. And so for me, I find that our two work in a very complementary way. And of course, I think there is much more that can be done. And the point is that these types of texts have something for everybody. They have something for scholars, they have something for community members. They're not easy to read. So if you want to make sense of them and you want to understand the logic, you have to write the commentary of that scale or read the commentary and then engage with how you feel, my choice, my hermeneutics of the various passages available to me. And so, I want to say that my commentary is an intertextual commentary, a more of that style. It's not designed to solve individual philological words or etymologies. It's not designed for that. It's really designed, I thought about it a lot. What type of commentary would make sense for a text of this nature? And for example, now when I work on Manu's chair, the commentary will be written very differently because its genre constraints are different. And so I think I would really sort of point out, say that, for those of you interested, take a look. It's not easy. It's hard to sort of read. You have to it's sort of easier to look at individual pieces here and there. But I would say that, both books are available open access at Harasovitz's website. You can freely download them. So there's no issue connected with cost or anything like that. And that is one of the great things that Alberto and Maria allowed me to do. And, that's, and Harasovitz was very kind of sort of open-minded about that. And I think, that's something that was kind of important to me because the work it's a technical project, but it has things that I think, I don't know a text other than this one that has so much material connected with so many other things. And I think this is the richness of what traditional hermeneutics has to offer, because in a very real sense, what I've tried to do is get away from this idea that this is an exegesis of the Old Avesta, of what the Old Avesta really was. this is a kind of reimagining, in a sense, of what the Old Avesta can be for that audience at that time. Now, what the time is a whole other question, of course.
Okay. So, unfortunately, thanks a lot for this detailed. I'm sure that you have a lot to discuss also in private by email with each other. Unfortunately, it's 2:31, so we have to interrupt right now. And thanks for this interesting discussion, Professor Pantera, Professor Vevaina, and all the others. And I think we can conclude. And
Very good.
yeah, Professor.
Thank you, Professor Vevaina, for this illuminating, engaging, and passionate presentation. And we look forward to having you in Toronto sometime soon. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this illuminating presentation.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so
Yuhan.
much.
Thank
It
you
was a
very
real
much.
pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.